I was part of an expert panel advising the DA on a case against my former high school principal, Mark Taylor, for embezzling funds meant for student scholarships. It was a chilly January morning in 2018 when I first met with the DA's office at the Starbucks on Main Street, just off the highway. I had always assumed Mark's annual charity runs were just PR stunts, but it turned out he was using student fundraising events to siphon off thousands of dollars into his own bank account. As a panel member, I had been digging through records and financial statements for weeks, but something still didn't sit right with me. Mark's defense team would often argue that the DA's evidence was circumstantial, and that we needed to look at the bigger picture. But I kept coming back to the fact that our school's account manager, Rachel, had suddenly quit her job just a month after the embezzlement started. There was no mention of her leaving in the school newsletter or on social media, and she vanished into thin air. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Rachel's disappearance than met the eye. And now, as I sat in the DA's office, going over the case files one last time before the trial, I had a nagging sense that I was missing something crucial. I should have kept reviewing those bank statements more closely. As I reviewed the bank statements for what felt like the 100th time, one transaction caught my eye. On March 15, 2017, a $500 withdrawal from our school's account had been labeled as a charity donation to a local animal shelter. But when I looked up the shelter's records, there was no record of receiving any money from our school that year. What really raised my eyebrows, though, was that the withdrawal had been processed at 9:03 p.m. on a Tuesday night by a teller named Alex at the Bank America branch on Elm Street. I distinctly remembered talking to Rachel, our account manager, about her concerns over some suspicious transactions around that time, but she had brushed it off as just typical small-town accounting errors. Now, seeing this specific transaction, with its exact date and time, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel might have known more than she was letting on. I decided to look up Alex's personnel file to see if there were any other discrepancies. As I scrolled through my computer, I noticed that my phone had received a text from an unknown number just hours before. Meet me at the diner at 7 p.m. on Friday. R. As I delved deeper into the case files, I started to notice inconsistencies in Mark's alibi for the time of the embezzlement. According to his defense team, he was at a conference in Chicago on the day the funds were transferred. But when I looked up the hotel's records, there was no record of him checking in until the next morning. I decided to investigate further and reached out to the conference organizer, who sent me a list of attendees. Mark was listed as a speaker, but his presentation was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. the following day. I made a mental note to ask the DA about this discrepancy. I also found a receipt from a local restaurant in Mark's expense reports, dated March 15, 2017, the same day the suspicious transaction occurred. The receipt showed a 50 meal at 8:45 p.m., but when I called the restaurant, they claimed to have no record of Mark being there that evening. I started keeping a list of all the inconsistencies I found, and it was growing longer by the minute. I began to suspect that Mark had an accomplice, someone who was helping him cover his tracks. But who and why? I decided to pay a visit to the Bank of America branch on Elm Street, where Alex the teller had processed the suspicious transaction. When I arrived, I asked to speak to Alex's supervisor, and after a brief wait, they brought out a middle-aged woman with a kind smile. Hi, I'm looking for information about a transaction processed by Alex on March 15, 2017, I explained. Can you tell me more about their role at the bank? The supervisor nodded and began to explain, but I interrupted her. Actually, can I see Alex's personnel file? I'm trying to understand the bank's procedures. The supervisor raised an eyebrow but handed over the file. As I flipped through it, I noticed that Alex had been working at the bank for over 10 years, with a spotless record. But what caught my attention was the note at the bottom of the page. Alex's family has been involved in local politics for years. A red flag went off in my head. Could this be the connection I was looking for? I made a mental note to look into Alex's family ties and see if they had any connections to Mark or the school. As I left the bank, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting close to uncovering the truth. But what I didn't know was that I was being watched, and it wasn't just by Mark's defense team. I stared at the security footage from that fateful night, my eyes fixed on Mark's defense team member, Jane, lingering outside Rachel's old apartment for 47 minutes, her face illuminated only by the flickering streetlight, her presence a mystery I couldn't shake. As I stared at the security footage, the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Jane, Mark's defense team member, was not just lingering outside Rachel's old apartment, she was dropping off a package. A package with a familiar return address, the Bank of America branch on Elm Street, the same branch where Alex the teller had processed the suspicious transaction on March 15, 2017. I remembered the note in Alex's personnel file about their family being involved in local politics for years, and I recalled the suspicious withdrawal from our school's account, labeled as a charity donation, to a local animal shelter. But what really caught my attention was the exact date and time of the withdrawal, 9:03 p.m. on a Tuesday night. It all clicked into place. Jane was not just a defense team member, she was also Alex's sister, and that suspicious transaction. It was a money transfer from our school's account to the Bank of America branch, where Jane worked. the charity donation, was actually a payment to cover up the embezzlement. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized the scope of Mark's scheme. He had an accomplice, and that accomplice was his own defense team member. The DA's office had been right all along. Mark was not acting alone. The security footage showed Jane lingering outside Rachel's apartment for 47 minutes. What she was doing there, I realized, was not just dropping off a package. As I sat in the DA's office watching Mark and Jane's defense team crumble, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. The DA's office had gathered enough evidence to charge Mark with embezzlement, conspiracy, and bribery. Jane, it turned out, had been using her position at the Bank of America branch to facilitate the transactions. I was asked to testify in court, and I did so calmly, recalling every detail of the suspicious transactions and the suspicious behavior of those involved. The verdict came down, and Mark was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His freedom taken away for the deceit he had perpetuated against our school and its students. Rachel's disappearance was finally explained. She had gone into witness protection, a decision made by the DA's office to keep her safe from those who had wronged us. As I left the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served. And when I looked up at the sky, I remembered Rachel's words to me. Don't let it eat away at you. I took a deep breath and let go of the anger, moving forward with a newfound appreciation for the strength and resilience of those who had been wronged. 2 weeks later, I wanted to follow up on the case against my former high school principal, Mark. I was blown away by the number of comments and messages I received. Thank you all for your support and understanding. The DA's office has since announced that Jane, Mark's accomplice, has pleaded guilty to her role in facilitating the embezzlement scheme. As a result, she faces a reduced sentence and will likely serve time concurrently with Mark's 10-year sentence. Personally, I've been keeping busy at work, using this experience as an opportunity to advocate for increased transparency and accountability in our district's finances. But when I'm not working or attending court dates, I find myself thinking about Rachel's words again. Don't let it eat away at you. It's a reminder that I'm still healing and that the process of justice is ongoing, but I'm trying to stay present and focused on the future. I'm Emily, a 32-year-old marketing manager who thought she had it all together. My business school friend Alex convinced me to invest in his startup, promising sky-high returns. I sunk over $200,000 into his company, thinking it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Alex would regularly take me out for lunch at the Cheesecake Factory and fill me in on the company's latest developments. He'd drive up to my apartment complex in his 2015 Tesla Model S, with the license plate frame that read, TSL4LIF. One time, he mentioned that he was meeting with a major client from his networking group at the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. I'd often see him parked outside the hotel, sipping on a Starbucks coffee and checking his phone. As the months went by, Alex started to avoid my calls and messages, and I began to feel like I was being forgotten as an investor. I should have done more research before handing over my life savings. It started with a small discrepancy in the company's financial reports that Alex mentioned during our lunch at the Cheesecake Factory on a Wednesday afternoon. He brushed it off as a minor glitch, but I remembered him emphasizing how crucial it was to get the numbers right before meeting with their major client at the Four Seasons Hotel the following week. The next day, I received an email from Alex stating that he needed to meet with me in person to discuss some important updates about my investment. He suggested we grab coffee at Starbucks, but I asked him to meet at the coffee shop inside the Whole Foods Market downtown instead, so I could pick up some groceries for my sister's birthday dinner later that evening. When Alex arrived, he seemed evasive and hesitant to discuss the financial reports, keeping his eyes darted around the coffee shop like he was checking for eavesdroppers. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, but Alex reassured me that everything was fine and that I should just trust him. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a long, frustrating journey to uncover the truth behind his startup. As I dug deeper, I started to notice small discrepancies in Alex's story. He would often mention that he was meeting with a major client from his networking group at the Four Seasons Hotel downtown, but when I looked up the hotel's calendar, there was no record of any meetings scheduled for that time. I asked him about it over coffee at Starbucks, and he brushed it off as a minor oversight. One day, while browsing through my email, I stumbled upon a message from Alex's assistant, scheduling a meeting with Mr. Johnson at the hotel. But when I called the hotel to confirm, they told me that there was no record of anyone named Mr. Johnson checking in. I asked Alex about it, and he claimed that it must have been a miscommunication. I started keeping a list of all the inconsistencies I found, and I began to feel like I was being lied to. I decided to investigate further and started looking into Alex's company records. What I found was shocking. The company had been shut down by the state for violating securities laws, but Alex had continued to solicit investors without disclosing this information. I also discovered that Alex's Tesla Model S, which he claimed was used for business purposes, was actually a company car leased by his wife's cousin's husband. I felt like I was unraveling a complex web of deceits. I decided to pay a visit to the state's business registration office and look up Alex's company records in person. When I arrived, I was told that the records had been sealed due to an ongoing investigation. I asked the clerk if she knew anything about it, and she leaned in close and whispered, "Let's just say that there are a lot of angry investors looking for answers." I left the office feeling frustrated and confused, but also more determined than ever to get to the bottom of things. As I walked back to my car, I noticed a piece of paper stuck between the windshield wipers. It was a receipt from the Four Seasons Hotel, dated the day before, with a handwritten note on the back that read, "Meet me at 7 p.m. at J." I had no idea who Jay was or what it meant, but I knew I had to investigate further. I pulled out the security footage from that fateful Wednesday afternoon, and my heart sank as I fast-forwarded to the coffee shop inside Whole Foods Market. Alex was nowhere to be seen, but his 2015 Tesla Model S was parked outside, engine still running. On the dashboard, a note read, "Meet me at the Cheesecake Factory tonight at 8, come alone." I pulled out the security footage from that fateful Wednesday afternoon, and my heart sank as I fast-forwarded to the coffee shop inside Whole Foods Market. Alex was nowhere to be seen, but his 2015 Tesla Model S was parked outside, engine still running. On the dashboard, a note read, "Meet me at the Cheesecake Factory tonight at 8, come alone." It was then that I noticed something I had missed before. The license plate frame of the car was now different. It read T-Cell for Life, no more, but instead JG for Life. I remembered Alex mentioning that he was meeting with a major client from his networking group at the Four Seasons Hotel downtown, and how he would often be parked outside the hotel, sipping on a Starbucks coffee and checking his phone. But what caught my attention was a photo of two men taken at the Four Seasons Hotel. One was Alex, and the other was a man with the same name as the sender of the mysterious note. "Meet me at 7 p.m. So Jay. I had been right to be suspicious about Alex's story. He wasn't just meeting clients at the hotel, he was meeting his business partner, Jackson, who had been secretly running the Ponzi scheme. The inconsistencies in Alex's story made sense now. He was hiding the fact that he was in it with Jackson, and that I was not just an investor, but a key part of their scheme. I felt a wave of shame wash over me as I realized how easily I had been duped. The note on the dashboard, "Meet me at the Cheesecake Factory tonight at 8, come alone," now made sense. Alex was trying to isolate me, to keep me from exposing the truth. But it was too late. I had already uncovered the truth, and I knew what I had to do next. I walked into the state's business registration office, this time armed with the evidence I needed to expose Alex's Ponzi scheme. The clerk recognized me from my previous visit and nodded sympathetically as I handed her the documentation. She efficiently processed the paperwork, sealing Alex's company records for good. As I left the office, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I remembered the countless nights I spent researching, digging through financial reports, and cross-checking receipts. The frustration, the anger, it all faded away as I walked out into the bright sunlight. I realized that I had been so focused on being right that I forgot to take care of myself. I made a mental note to schedule a massage appointment for the weekend. The 2015 Tesla Model S, with its revised license plate frame reading, "JJ for Life," was now in a secured lot awaiting impound. Alex and Jackson were facing charges of securities fraud and conspiracy to commit a crime. They would serve time, but I knew that true justice came from within. My own resilience and determination had helped me uncover the truth. As I turned the corner onto Main Street, I spotted a used bookstore I had never noticed before. The sign read, "Bookworm's Heaven." I felt a spark of curiosity and stepped inside. 2 weeks later, I'm still trying to process the whirlwind that's been my life since exposing Alex's Ponzi scheme. The post got more attention than I expected, with some people expressing gratitude for my willingness to speak out, while others questioned why I didn't realize what was happening sooner. I've received a few messages from acquaintances who lost significant amounts to the scheme and are still trying to recover. The state's attorney general called me last week to inform me that Alex and Jackson will be facing additional charges related to tax evasion. I also had to deal with some unexpected fallout. My old business school had contacted me to let me know that they'll be conducting a review of their investment club policies in light of my experience. Now that the dust has settled, I'm left to figure out what I want to do next. I'm Emily, a 28-year-old marketing specialist living in the Atlanta suburbs. My family is always getting on my case about settling down and having kids, but I've been too busy building my career to think about that. Last weekend, I was at my grandmother's farm in rural Georgia for her wedding anniversary celebration. It was a big, loud affair with all of her friends and family there. My grandmother slipped me a cryptic letter while we were taking photos with the wedding party. Just one sentence. "Your real mother died at sea when you were only hours old." I brushed it off as a weird joke, but it stuck in my head. I've always known my mom passed away when I was born, but I never thought much of it. My parents have always been open with me about their life before I came along, so I assumed this was just some minor family legend that had been passed down through the generations. I drove home from the wedding in my trusty old Honda Civic, a 2007 model with a faded sunroof sticker from my college days. It was late at night, and I was still thinking about the letter when I pulled into my driveway and saw that my neighbor's porch light was out. Again. I've been meaning to remind her to get it fixed for weeks now. As I walked past the laundry room on my way inside, I noticed our building's maintenance request form on the fridge had a note scribbled on the back in red pen. Don't go in the attic. As I walked past the laundry room on my way inside, I noticed our building's maintenance request form on the fridge had a note scribbled on the back in red pen. Don't go in the attic. I remembered my mom mentioning that we had some old storage up there from when I was a kid, but she'd always said it was off limits due to some sort of termite infestation. I shrugged it off as a weird reminder to clean up some old paperwork, but something about the scribble's hasty, messy handwriting nagged at me. I glanced over at my trusty old Honda Civic, still parked in the driveway, and noticed that the driver's side window was slightly rolled down. I always kept it locked. Now, however, a faint whisper of fresh air carried in on the evening breeze, carrying with it the scent of mildew from somewhere deeper in the house. I stepped out of my Honda Civic and onto the driveway, gazing up at our apartment complex's parking lot. It was a quiet night, with only a few cars scattered about. I glanced over at the laundry room on my way inside. Noticing that the window was open by a crack, I always kept it closed. I shrugged it off as a minor oversight, thinking maybe one of the other residents had left it ajar. As I entered the apartment, I noticed the familiar scent of my grandmother's perfume wafting from the living room. I made a mental note to thank her for the gift she'd left on the coffee table, a vintage locket with a photo of my great-grandmother inside. I put the key down on the counter and began to prep for bed, feeling a strange sense of fatigue wash over me. The next morning, I strolled into the laundry room to do a load of washing and spotted an unfamiliar name scribbled on the wall above the washer, Eleanor 3015. I didn't recognize the handwriting or the dates, but something about it nagged at me. I decided to research Eleanor in public records, wondering if she might be a neighbor or former resident. As I started typing away on my laptop, I caught a whiff of mildew carried in on the air vent, an odd scent for our typically well-maintained complex. Later that day, while doing some grocery shopping at the nearby Kroger, I overheard a woman whispering on her phone about the package being delivered safely. The words sent a shiver down my spine, but when I turned to eavesdrop further, she hastily covered the receiver and excused herself. I continued shopping, my mind whirling with possibilities. Back at home, I started keeping a list of all the anomalies I discovered: the open laundry room window, the perfume scent, the mysterious note on the wall, and now this overheard phone conversation. As I sat down to review my notes, I spotted a faint stain on the coffee table from my grandmother's gift. It looked like a spot of spilled coffee, but I was certain she'd never done that before. I crept into the attic, my heart pounding with every creaking step. The air was thick with dust and something else, the faint scent of salt water, like my grandmother's perfume, but not quite. As I fumbled for the light switch, a tattered piece of fabric caught my eye, fluttering in the draft from the window. As I gazed at the tattered fabric in the attic, I felt a wave of déjà vu wash over me. The scent of salt water and mildew hit me again, but this time it was familiar. I remembered a faded Polaroid on my grandmother's mantel, a photo I'd always assumed was from my parents' pre-marriage travels. It depicted a young woman standing at the edge of a beach, her long hair blowing in the wind. I recalled my grandmother mentioning that she had lost contact with her sister after they were orphaned as children. The note on the wall, Eleanor 3050, made sense now. It was my grandmother's given name, not a neighbor's. The whispers on the phone about the package being delivered safely referred to something far more sinister than a delivery from Amazon. As I pieced together the fragments of information, the truth hit me like a slap in the face. My real mother wasn't dead at all. She was Eleanor, and she'd been living in our attic for years, kept hidden by my grandparents' cruel deception. The faint scent of salt water wasn't from perfume, it was from Eleanor's belongings, slowly being consumed by the dampness. I recalled the note on the fridge, "Don't go in the attic," and realized that it wasn't a maintenance request, it was a desperate attempt to keep me away. My grandmother's cryptic letter had been a veiled warning, a way of telling me the truth without actually saying it. The weight of their secrets crushed me, but I knew I had to confront Eleanor. As I called out her name, the attic fell silent, and I was left standing alone in the darkness, waiting for an answer that would change everything. As I stood in the attic, the dusty air thick with secrets, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I knew I had to contact the authorities and report what I discovered. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. "Your real mother died at sea when you were only hours old." But that was a lie, a desperate attempt to cover up the truth. Eleanor, my biological mother, had been living in our attic for years, hidden away by my grandparents' cruel deception. I called the police and reported what I'd found. They arrived an hour later, and after a thorough investigation, my grandparents were charged with felony kidnapping, conspiracy to commit perjury, and obstruction of justice. The court ordered them to undergo counseling and community service, and they were forced to vacate our family home. As I watched them leave, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I finally knew the truth about my family's past, and I was free to start anew. I looked around the attic, now empty except for the tattered fabric and a few scattered memories. I took a deep breath, and with a sense of closure, I began to clear out the space. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the scandal that's been brewing at Springdale High School. As the student council advisor, I've seen my fair share of drama and controversy, but this one takes the cake. It all started when our principal, Mr. Johnson, informed me that he was revoking my invitation to speak at graduation. He claimed it was a conflict of interest, since I'm a former student myself, but I knew there was more to it. I've always been close with my parents, especially my mom, who's a local business owner. She runs a small boutique in the Oakwood Mall and has been kind enough to give me a part-time job over the years. I drive her old Honda Civic, which she got in 2010, to work every day. It's a reliable little car that's seen better days, but it's home. Anyway, my mom was the one who first broke the news about Mr. Johnson's decision to me over coffee at the mall cafe. She mentioned that one of his friends had been getting some interesting phone calls from a certain student, and I knew right away who she was talking about. Emily Patel is a sweet kid who's been struggling to balance schoolwork with a part-time job, but I've always admired her determination. As I started digging deeper into the story, I discovered that Mr. Johnson had been having an affair with one of my former classmates, and get this, it was Emily herself. I should have seen it coming, but I'm still trying to process the details. It's a tangled web, but I'm determined to get to the bottom of it. I was driving home from the mall in my mom's 2010 Honda Civic on Wednesday evening, stopping at the Redbox kiosk to return a DVD I'd borrowed from my roommate's sister. As I inserted the disc and waited for it to be processed, I noticed a strange, folded piece of paper tucked between the Redbox's glass doors and the frame. It was a printout of an email, partially torn off, but what caught my attention was the sender's name, Emily Patel. The timestamp on the corner read 9:47 a.m. that morning, just an hour before I'd spoken with Mr. Johnson about the graduation speaker controversy. My heart started to quicken as I wondered why Emily's name kept popping up in this mess. I carefully retrieved the paper and stashed it between my seat and the door, trying not to draw attention to myself as I returned the DVD and paid the rental fee. I started to notice strange things around the school after Mr. Johnson's decision. At first, it was just minor stuff. A stapler would be missing from my desk, only to reappear later in the same day. I thought maybe it was just Emma, our school's resident prankster, playing tricks on me. But then I saw her talking to Mr. Johnson during lunch, and they seemed to be having a serious conversation. I decided to do some digging and started looking into Mr. Johnson's past. I checked the school's archives and found an old yearbook photo of him standing next to a woman who looked eerily familiar. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in on the picture, and that's when I saw it. The woman was Emily Patel's mom. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized the connections were piling up. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences, hoping to find some pattern or clue that would explain what was going on. I added Emma talking to Mr. Johnson and yearbook photo of Mr. Johnson with Emily's mom to the lists. The next day, I saw Mr. Johnson arguing with one of the teachers in his office. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told me it was serious. I made a note to look into who the teacher was and what their relationship was with Mr. Johnson. As the days went by, I noticed more and more anomalies. The school's security cameras seemed to be malfunctioning, always showing a fuzzy image of a person in the hallway. I started to feel like I was living in some kind of surveillance state. I added security camera malfunctions to my list. I also started to notice that Emily Patel was always absent during school hours, but every time she came back, she seemed different. Her eyes would be red-rimmed, and her usual bright smile would be replaced with a sullen look. I started to wonder if Mr. Johnson was using some kind of coercion or manipulation to keep her quiet. I decided to do some research on Emily's family and discovered that they were going through some financial difficulties. I'm reviewing the security footage from Wednesday afternoon, and I just saw Mr. Johnson leaving his office with Emily Patel's mom, who was wearing the same perfume he bought for her last Christmas. They walked out into the parking lot together, but then something bizarre happened. The camera caught a glimpse of Emily Patel herself getting into Mr. Johnson's car, her eyes locked on mine as she drove away. I'm still trying to process the revelation that has shaken me to my core. The security footage I reviewed earlier revealed a shocking truth. Mr. Johnson, the high school principal who banned me from speaking at graduation, was having an affair with Emily Patel's mother, but there's more. Emily herself was not only involved in the affair, but had also been using our school's resources, including the Redbox kiosk where I found the incriminating email, to communicate with her mother and Mr. Johnson. The camera caught a glimpse of Emily getting into Mr. Johnson's car on Wednesday afternoon, just hours after our conversation about the graduation speaker controversy. The malfunctions I noticed in the security cameras were not just random errors. They were actually being caused by Emily's mother, who was trying to cover their tracks. The list I kept of strange occurrences makes sense now. Emma talking to Mr. Johnson, the yearbook photo of him with Emily's mom, the security camera malfunctions, and even the absence of Emily during school hours. All of it was part of their web of deceit. As I look back, I realize that Emily's demeanor changed after her mother started visiting her at school, and I now understand why she seemed different. The perfume mistress, Johnson bought for her last Christmas, which I saw in the security footage, is the same one Emily's mother wears. It all makes sense now, the connections, the cover-ups, the manipulation. It's a complex and disturbing truth, but I'm glad I was able to uncover it. I sat in the principal's office, finally face to face with Mr. Johnson and Emily Padal's mother, who had been orchestrating the whole affair. The police arrived shortly after, and it was clear that Mr. Johnson was in big trouble. He was charged with 2 counts of adultery and 1 count of harassment, which was a perfect fit given all the strange occurrences I'd documented. The school board fired him on the spot, and Emily's mother was forced to resign as well. It was a bittersweet victory. While justice had been served, I couldn't help but feel sad for Emily, who had been caught up in her mother's web of deceit. As I watched Mr. Johnson being led away in handcuffs, I thought about the security footage and how it had revealed the truth. I remembered the email I found at the Redbox kiosk and how it had changed everything. In the end, it was all about following my instincts and being willing to dig deeper, no matter how uncomfortable it got. As I left the school building, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, knowing that I'd done the right thing. I'm a successful architect in my late 30s, with a growing family and a thriving business. My husband, Alex, and I have been married for 8 years, and our daughter, Emily, is 4 years old. We live in a beautiful Victorian house in the historic district of Portland, Oregon. It's a Sunday morning in early May, and I'm sipping coffee on the back porch while Alex is taking Emily to the park. I've just returned from a 2-week project in New Orleans, where I was restoring a stunning 19th-century mansion for a high-end client. The client's name is Harrison Grant, and he's a reclusive novelist with a reputation for being eccentric. He's been paying me top dollar to bring his vision to life, but I have to admit that I'm curious about what he's trying to create. As I look out at our garden, I notice that the grass needs mowing and the azaleas need pruning. We usually hire someone to do the yard work, but today I think I'll tackle it myself. I head back inside to grab my gardening gloves and notice a package on the kitchen counter. It's from the local hardware store, Ace Hardware, and it has a note attached that reads, "For your project, Emma." Alex? I'm not sure what he's talking about, but I assume it's something for our house. I put the gloves in my bag and head out to the backyard, feeling a bit distracted. As I start mowing the lawn, I notice that our neighbor's dog is watching me from across the fence. It's a small, fluffy terrier, and he looks like he's trying to tell me something. I should have kept locking it. As I mowed the lawn, I noticed that the sprinkler system on our neighbor's property was malfunctioning, and water was spraying everywhere, wasting a lot of water. I thought to myself, they really need to get that fixed. But what caught my attention was the large cardboard box on their front porch, partially hidden by the azaleas. It had the logo of Home Depot printed on it, but it looked out of place among the rest of the garden decorations. I made a mental note to mention it to Alex when he got back from taking Emily to the park. As I continued mowing, I heard the sound of their dog whining and scratching at the door. Our neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, came out and called the dog off, saying something about it being anxious because of the storm forecast for later that day. But as she walked past me, I noticed a small, almost imperceptible pause in her step, like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. I dismissed it as paranoia, but a shiver ran down my spine as I continued working. It was an ordinary Sunday morning, but something felt off. As I continued mowing the lawn, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I noticed that our neighbor's garden decorations were perfectly aligned, almost too perfect. I remembered seeing a gardening show on TV where they used string and stakes to achieve symmetry. I made a mental note to ask Alex if he had ever done that. As I finished mowing the lawn, I walked over to the fence and said hello to Mrs. Jenkins, who was watering her flowers with a hose. She smiled and said hello, but I caught a glimpse of something suspicious, a small notebook hidden behind a potted plant on her porch. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just a gardening journal, but as the day went on, I found myself thinking about it more often. When Alex came home with Emily, I asked him if he had seen anything unusual around the neighborhood, but he just shook his head and said maybe it was the storm forecast that was getting everyone on edge. As we sat down for lunch, I noticed that our kitchen table was spotless, almost too clean. I remembered asking Alex to put away the dishes from the night before, but now they were nowhere to be seen. I started to feel a bit annoyed, thinking he had left them in the dishwasher again. But as I looked closer, I saw that the cabinets were open, and there were no dirty dishes inside. It was as if someone had been in the kitchen, tidying up after themselves. I made a note to ask Alex about it later. After lunch, Emily went down for a nap, and Alex took her for a walk around the block. I decided to use the time to tidy up the living room and sort out some papers on my desk. As I was organizing the files, I stumbled upon a receipt from Home Depot that I had not seen before. It was for a large package of gardening gloves, and the date was several weeks ago. I remembered asking Alex if we needed any gardening supplies, but he had said no. I wondered if maybe Mrs. Jenkins had been buying them for her own garden. As I sorted through the papers on my desk, I noticed a strange symbol etched into the corner of one of the receipts. It looked like a cross between a logo and a hieroglyphic. I turned it over, trying to make sense of it, but there was no other information on the back. As I stared at the symbol on the receipt, a shiver ran down my spine. I turned it over, trying to make sense of it, but there was no other information on the back. Suddenly, it clicked into place. The Home Depot package with gardening gloves, Mrs. Jenkins' perfectly aligned garden decorations, and the small notebook hidden behind a potted plant, all of it made sense now. The reclusive novelist, Harrison Grant, had been using our neighborhood as a real-life utopian novel experiment. He had created an entire community, complete with its own set of rules and social norms. Mrs. Jenkins, with her perfectly manicured gardens, was one of his characters, and the package of gardening gloves, a prop to help her maintain her character's facade. I remembered the storm forecast for later that day, and how Mrs. Jenkins had seemed anxious about it. It wasn't just the weather that was getting her on edge, it was the knowledge that Harrison Grant's experiment was about to be exposed. The symbol on the receipt was a logo for the New Eden, a name I had seen mentioned in Harrison Grant's published works. I felt a sense of horror wash over me as I realized the true nature of our neighborhood. The ordinary Sunday morning had turned into something sinister, and I had unknowingly been a part of it. As I stood there, holding the receipt with the symbol on it, I felt a mix of emotions: shock, anger, but also a sense of understanding. The neighborhood's perfect facade had been cracked, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I decided to confront Harrison Grant about his experiment, but before I could do that, I called the police and reported what I had discovered. They arrived promptly and took Mrs. Jenkins into custody for her role in perpetuating the charade. As it turned out, she had been manipulated by Harrison Grant into becoming one of his characters. The police also seized all records and documents from Harrison's property, and he was subsequently charged with human trafficking, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit a crime. The judge later sentenced him to life in prison without parole. I, on the other hand, was left to process the experience and rebuild my trust in the world. But as I looked out at our neighborhood, now transformed from a sinister experiment to a community that was finally free, I felt a sense of hope and renewal. The azaleas, which had once seemed so perfectly manicured, now bloomed with a vibrant new beauty, their colors more vivid than ever before. I've been visiting my parents in Costa Rica for summer vacations since I was a kid. My mom, Maria, has always been passionate about ecotourism and sustainable living. We'd spend our days hiking through rainforests, kayaking on Lake Arenal, and learning about the local wildlife from the guides. Last year, we stayed at the Hotel Punta Isleta, where we had a lovely dinner at their restaurant overlooking the ocean. My dad, Carlos, is a bit more of an adventure seeker and has always been fascinated by the history of the region. He's particularly interested in the stories about the militias that operated on sovereign territories in the 1990s. I remember him talking about this to me one evening while we were driving through San Jose in our Honda CR-V, a 2007 model he's very proud of. He mentioned something about how some of these groups are still active today and how they're trying to protect the indigenous communities from exploitation. I tried to brush it off as just another one of his eccentricities, but now I'm not so sure. We've been going to the same grocery store, Maxi Despensas, every week for our essentials, and my mom always insists on buying local produce and artisanal cheeses. She's very particular about supporting the community development projects that the store supports. My dad would always tease her about being too idealistic, but I think she just wants to do good in the world. As we were leaving the store last week, he leaned in close and whispered something to me that made my heart skip a beat. "We're not who you think we are." As we were unpacking groceries from Maxi Despensas, I noticed my mom's wallet was missing from her usual spot on the counter. I asked my dad if he had seen it, but he just shrugged and said he hadn't touched it. I helped him load the dishwasher, which was a Siemens model he'd recently installed himself. As we were putting away the dishes, I saw the security footage from our home surveillance system, a 2008 model by Dawa, on the TV screen. It showed us arriving at the grocery store an hour earlier, but there was no footage of us leaving. The parking lot was empty, except for a silver Ford F-150 with tinted windows parked near the entrance. I pointed it out to my dad, but he just said it must have been a neighbor's car. I remember thinking nothing of it at the time, but now I'm not so sure. The camera's blind spot near the entrance was always a bit of a concern for me, and I had mentioned it to my dad before. As I continued to unpack the groceries from Maxi Despensas, I noticed that my mom's wallet was still missing. I asked my dad if he had seen it, but he just shrugged and said he hadn't touched it. I helped him load the dishwasher, which was a Siemens model he'd recently installed himself. As we were putting away the dishes, I saw the security footage from our home's surveillance system, a 2008 model by Dawa, on the TV screen. It showed us arriving at the grocery store an hour earlier, but there was no footage of us leaving. The parking lot was empty, except for a silver Ford F-150 with tinted windows parked near the entrance. I pointed it out to my dad, but he just said it must have been a neighbor's car. I remember thinking nothing of it at the time, but now I'm not so sure. The camera's blind spot near the entrance was always a bit of a concern for me, and I had mentioned it to my dad before. I started keeping a list of all the strange occurrences. I wrote down the date, time, and details of each incident. My mom's wallet went missing on Tuesday, but we didn't report it to the police. I had not changed the combination lock on our safe in years, and now I wondered if someone had been using it without my knowledge. I remembered a phone call from an unknown number last week, but I had ignored it. The caller ID showed a local number, but when I called back, there was no answer. I checked the receipts from our grocery store visits and noticed that we'd been buying an unusual amount of non-perishable food items. I started paying closer attention to my parents' behavior. My dad would often receive mysterious packages in the mail, which he would quickly open and dispose of without saying a word. My mom would sometimes get phone calls and whisper something to him, making me feel like I was missing out on important information. I decided to investigate further and started searching online for information about the militias that operated on sovereign territories in the 1990s. As I scrolled through my dad's old phone records, I noticed a number that kept popping up, the same one from the mysterious call last week. But what caught my attention was the name associated with it: Militia Support Services. My dad's 2007 Honda CR-V had an empty gas tank, and our usual fuel station, Repsol, showed no records of a recent fill-up. As I scrolled through my dad's old phone records, I noticed the mysterious number again, the one from Militia Support Services. But what caught my attention was the name associated with it: Operation Phoenix. My mind racing, I remembered the conversation my parents had overheard at the Hotel Punta Isleta restaurant last year. They were talking about a local group that had been working with the militia to protect indigenous communities from exploitation. My dad had mentioned something about how they were trying to raise funds for a new safe house, and my mom had been skeptical about the legitimacy of their cause. I wondered if they had been involved all along, using our vacations as cover for their activities. The silver Ford F-150 with tinted windows in the parking lot footage now made sense. It was likely one of their vehicles. My dad's 2007 Honda CR-V, which had been sitting idle in our driveway, suddenly seemed like a key piece of evidence. I remembered the mysterious packages he used to receive in the mail, and the unusual amount of non-perishable food items we'd been buying at Maxi dispenses. It all clicked into place. My parents weren't just ecotourisms, they were operatives for Operation Phoenix. The militia support services on their phone records made sense now, and so did the strange behavior. My mom's wallet going missing, the lack of security footage from our home's surveillance systems. It was all part of a larger operation to keep their activities under wraps. I felt a mix of emotions, shock, anger, but also a sense of sadness for the lies my parents had been living. I called the Costa Rican authorities, and they launched an investigation into Operation Phoenix's activities in our country. My parents were arrested and charged with supporting a terrorist organization and violating human rights laws. As I waited for their trial, I had to come to terms with everything I had uncovered. I reflected on all the seemingly innocent moments we had shared: the hikes, the kayaking trips, the dinners at Hotel Punta Isleta, and how they were all part of a larger web of deceit. But amidst the shock and anger, I also felt a sense of pride in myself for being brave enough to confront the truth. My mom's wallet going missing, the mysterious packages, the silver Ford F-150, it all made sense now. I knew that my parents' actions had consequences, not just for themselves but for the people they claimed to be protecting. The thought of indigenous communities being exploited and harmed by our militia's actions weighed heavily on me. But as I looked back, I realized that I had been given a rare gift: the chance to confront the darkness in my family's past and to emerge stronger because of it. I knew that I would carry this experience with me for the rest of my life, but I also knew that I was ready to move forward, wiser and more compassionate than before.
I'm Alex, 32-year-old marketing specialist living in downtown Los Angeles. I've been engaged to my fiancée, Emma, for 3 years, and we're finally planning our wedding. We're expecting the baby shower to be next Saturday at 2 p.m. at the Pottery Barn store on Wilshire Boulevard. Emma's parents are flying in from Chicago for the event, and I'm excited to show them around the city. They're the ones who gave us the custom-made engagement ring, which I've been wearing proudly since last year's Christmas dinner. It's a beautiful platinum band with a small diamond. But what makes it special is that it was given to Emma by her grandmother on her own wedding day. It's a family heirloom that's been passed down for generations. I've been thinking about getting the ring appraised, as it seems like it might be worth more than we initially thought. Little do I know, this piece of jewelry has a dark history that will change everything. As I was getting ready for the baby shower next Saturday, I received an email from Emma's parents informing me that they'd made reservations at the Cheesecake Factory on Sunset Boulevard for 5 p.m. the same day. They mentioned that they wanted to celebrate my future stepson's arrival over dinner before the party. I smiled and replied, thanking them for their thoughtfulness. However, as I opened the attached PDF with the reservation details, I noticed something peculiar. The server's name was listed as Emily, instead of the usual Tim. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was a minor mistake. But later that evening, I checked Emma's mother's Facebook post about the upcoming visit and saw that she had mentioned our future son would be meeting his great Aunt Emily for the first time. The same name kept popping up in different contexts, and a shiver ran down my spine as I wondered if this was just a simple coincidence or something more. I started getting strange looks from Emma's parents during dinner at the Cheesecake Factory. They seemed overly interested in my job as a marketing specialist, asking me pointed questions about my clients and revenue streams. I brushed it off as enthusiasm for the baby shower, but now I'm not so sure. When I got home, I found a package on my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a small antique-style music box with a note that read, "For Emma, from Emily." I had never heard of an Emily giving Emma gifts before, and I couldn't recall Emma mentioning any friends or relatives with that name. I put the music box aside, thinking it might be a misunderstanding, but it kept nagging at me. I decided to dig into Emma's family history, so I visited the Chicago Public Library and spent hours browsing through old newspapers and genealogy records. I found a mention of Emma's grandmother passing down the engagement ring to her daughter, but nothing about a relative named Emily. However, when I searched online for Emily, alongside Emma's last name, a peculiar article popped up from 20 years ago. A woman named Emily had been involved in a scandal at a local jewelry store, accused of selling fake engagement rings to unsuspecting couples. That evening, I received an email from Emma's mother asking me to come over and discuss the baby shower arrangements. As I was driving to her house, I noticed a black SUV following me, its tinted windows reflecting the city lights. I sped up, but the SUV kept pace with me until I lost it in traffic. When I arrived at Emma's parents' house, I saw the same SUV parked outside. I decided to investigate further and started keeping a record of any unusual occurrences. Over the next few days, I noticed that Emma's parents seemed to be avoiding direct questions about the ring or Emily. They would change the subject or laugh nervously when I brought it up. I also found a small notebook in Emma's purse with a list of names, including Emily. The entries were cryptic, but one name caught my eye: Emily Jewelers 1999. I wondered if this was connected to the scandal I'd read about online. I opened the small, antique-style music box and pressed the delicate key. The tune was hauntingly familiar, but it was the inscription that made my heart sink. Emily's song, "Forever Loved." Emma's eyes widened as she stared at me, her voice trembling. "Where did you find this?" As I stared at Emma's tear-stained face, I realized that the antique music box was more than just a creepy gift from her mysterious Aunt Emily. The inscription, "Emily's song, Forever Loved," was actually a reference to the engagement ring I'd been wearing on my finger. It was the same platinum band, with a small diamond that her grandmother had given to her daughter, but it wasn't just any ring. It was a replica, made from the same original ring that had been stolen by Emily in 1999 from a local jewelry store. The article I'd read about the scandal had been real, and Emma's family had been involved all along. They had been selling fake engagement rings to unsuspecting couples, and my ring was one of them. Emma's parents had given me the ring as a gift, but it wasn't just a kind gesture, it was a test, to see how far I would go to uncover the truth. The SUV that had been following me was actually the same black sedan that Emily used to drive, and the license plate number matched the one on the news article. I remembered the way Emma's mother had laughed nervously when I brought up the topic of Emily, and it made sense now. They had been trying to keep their involvement a secret, but I had finally pieced together the puzzle. The music box's haunting melody still echoed in my mind, but now it was tainted with a sense of betrayal and deception. I looked at Emma, and she knew that I knew. Her eyes dropped, and she whispered, "I'm sorry, Alex." I walked into the police station, the engagement ring in my hand, and told them everything. Emma's parents were arrested on the spot for mail fraud and forgery. They were charged with selling fake engagement rings to unsuspecting couples, including mine. The antique music box was seized as evidence, and I finally felt a sense of closure. Emma and I sat down to talk about our future, and for the first time, she didn't avoid my questions. She broke down in tears, apologizing for her parents' actions. I held her, trying to process everything that had happened. As we talked, I realized that the engagement ring was just a small part of a larger issue, a family legacy of deceit and betrayal. Emma and I decided to go forward with our wedding, but without the ring. We promised to rebuild our trust and start anew. The music box, once a haunting melody, now felt like a reminder of the darkness we'd faced and overcome.
I'm still trying to process the strange behavior my mom exhibited after returning from her trip to Asia last fall. She had been gone for 3 months, working as a cultural attaché for the Chinese government while secretly collaborating with U.S. intelligence. When she stepped off the plane, her eyes seemed different. My husband, Alex, and I took turns asking her about her experiences, but she kept saying everything was fine. She wouldn't even look at me when I asked if something was wrong. I work as an accountant at a small firm in downtown Portland, where I drive a 2018 Toyota Corolla. On the way home from work one evening, I stopped by the Fred Meyer on Division to pick up some groceries. As I was checking out, I noticed my mom's phone number on the receipts for several suspicious transactions. The dates matched the period she was abroad. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. The next day, Alex and I decided to have dinner at that new Vietnamese restaurant on 82nd. We arrived at 7:05 p.m., just as they were opening, and got seated near the window. My mom walked in 5 minutes later, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She was laughing with one of the waiters, who seemed to know her intimately. I didn't want to pry, but my curiosity was piqued. As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, my mom excused herself to the restroom. I glanced at the restaurant's flyer on the counter, which listed their hours as 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week. My mom emerged from the restroom, glanced at her watch, and hurried out without saying goodbye. That's when I started to feel like something was off. I should have kept asking questions. As I continued to review the receipts from my mom's trip, I noticed a pattern. Every purchase had been made using a specific credit card company, with transactions ranging from 20 to 50 each time. I recognized the logo on the receipts as belonging to a brand called Discover, which I used for my own credit cards. What caught my attention was that the last purchase had been made just 2 days ago, and the store name was a local boutique called F-150 in downtown Portland. I pulled out my phone and quickly searched for the store's hours, noting that it closed at 6 p.m. on Fridays. Since it was now 8:10 p.m. on Friday, I wondered if someone had been in the store recently. The thought sent a shiver down my spine as I realized that my mom's return to Portland seemed to be more involved than I initially thought. I started reviewing my mom's credit card statements again, this time focusing on her online shopping habits. I noticed that she had made a purchase from a local boutique called F-150 in downtown Portland. But the date of the transaction was 2 days ago. Since it was now 8:10 p.m. on Friday, I wondered if someone had been in the store recently. I made a mental note to check the store's hours and look for any surveillance footage. The next day, I visited the F-150 boutique and spoke with one of the sales associates. She told me that the store closed at 6 p.m. on Fridays, which explained why my mom's purchase had been made after hours. However, she also mentioned that they had a security camera installed near the entrance, which might have captured footage of the transaction. I asked to review the footage, and after some digging, I managed to obtain a copy of the video from the previous night. As I fast-forwarded through the footage, I noticed a figure entering the store around 9 p.m. The person's face was partially obscured by a hoodie, but I could see that they were wearing a distinctive silver watch on their wrist. I zoomed in on the watch and noticed a peculiar symbol etched onto the face. It looked like a hieroglyphic, but I couldn't quite place it. I made a note to research the symbol further and see if I could find any connections to my mom's activities. That evening, I decided to pay a visit to the local Chinese consulate, hoping to get some information about my mom's trip to Asia. As I waited in line, I noticed a flyer on the bulletin board advertising a cultural event featuring a speaker from the Chinese Ministry of Culture. The name of the speaker was Dr. Li Wei, and I recognized it as one of the names on my mom's itinerary. I approached the consulate staff and asked if they could provide me with more information about Dr. Li Wei's visit. They told me that the event was scheduled for next week, but that Dr. Li Wei would be meeting with some local dignitaries earlier that day. I pulled out the footage of my mom entering F-150 on Friday night, and what I saw made my heart skip a beat. She wasn't alone. A figure in a hoodie was standing just behind her, but when I zoomed in, their face was obscured by a familiar silver watch with an eerie symbol etched onto the face. As I fast-forwarded through the footage of my mom's visit to F-150, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about the silver watch on her companion's wrist. It was an eerie symbol etched onto the face, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I made a mental note to research it further, but my mind kept wandering back to my mom's behavior since her return from Asia. The way she avoided eye contact, the strange transactions on her credit card statements, it all started to make sense now. My heart sank as I realized that my mom wasn't just working as a cultural attaché, but was also involved in something much more sinister. The symbol on the watch was a hieroglyphic from an ancient Chinese text, used to identify members of a clandestine organization operating within the Chinese government's diplomatic corps. My mom had been recruited by them to gather intelligence, and her companion in the footage was likely a handler or a fellow operative. The F-150 purchase was just a cover, a way to obtain a specific item that would help them maintain their secret. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized my mom had lied to me about her work, and that she was caught up in something much bigger than herself. The thought of her being in danger of being used by these people was almost too much to bear. I knew I had to do something, but for now, I just sat there, frozen, trying to process the shocking truth. I sat in my living room, staring at the silver watch on my coffee table, trying to process everything I had learned. The symbol etched onto its face was more than just a hieroglyphic. It was a badge of honor for the clandestine organization my mom had been working with. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sense of responsibility. I knew I had to report what I had discovered to the authorities, but I also wanted to protect my mom from the consequences. After consulting with a lawyer, we decided to cooperate with the U.S. intelligence and provide them with all the information we had gathered. The organization's leaders were arrested and charged with espionage and conspiracy. My mom was given immunity in exchange for her testimony against her handlers. As I watched her being led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The ordeal had been traumatic, but it had also brought us closer together. I realized that my mom's actions, though misguided, were motivated by a desire to serve her country and protect its interests. I knew that I would never look at her in the same way again, but I was grateful for the opportunity to understand her perspective. I've been working as a marketing specialist at Green Tech Inc. for 5 years, making decent money and living in a small apartment in downtown Portland. My husband, Alex, is a freelance graphic designer who works from home. He's always been supportive of my career goals, even when I decided to pursue a promotion that turned out to be a nightmare. My manager at the time was Rachel Paddles, a middle-aged woman with a pinched smile and a talent for making me feel like I was walking on eggshells. She had a reputation for being ruthless in the office, but I never thought she'd go after me directly. That all changed when I filed a formal complaint about her behavior towards me at a company event last year. Now, I'm not sure what's more disturbing, the fact that Rachel is still working here, or the rumors that she's been getting paid off by our biggest client to look the other way. I received a call from HR this morning, summoning me to a meeting about ongoing issues with my performance. I know exactly what this is about. I should have kept recording those meetings. I walked into the meeting with HR expecting the usual bland office coffee and stale air, but what caught my attention was the folder on the conference table labeled Confidential, Green Tech Inc. in bold black font. Rachel Patel wasn't present, but a young man with a nervous smile, wearing a bright blue polo shirt from the local golf course, handed me a cup of lukewarm coffee from the Starbucks next door. As we sat down, he mentioned the meeting was to discuss my ongoing performance issues. I noticed the timestamp on the folder was 8:47 a.m., exactly the time our company's client ecotourism usually made their quarterly payments. The rumors about Rachel's kickback scheme had been circulating for weeks, but I never thought it would affect me directly. Now, I felt a twinge of unease, like the fluorescent lights overhead were humming a little too loudly. I walked out of the meeting with HR feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The folder labeled Confidential, Green Tech Inc. was still on the conference table, and I couldn't help but wonder what else was hidden inside. I made a mental note to ask Alex about the golf course polo shirt and the brand of coffee cup our HR rep had handed me. It seemed like an odd detail to remember, but something about it nagged at me. As I left the office building, I noticed a strange noise coming from my phone. It was an email notification from Rachel Padel's email account, sent to me at 8:45 a.m. that morning. The subject line read, Confidential, Urgent. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I had not changed my password in over a year, and suddenly I was getting emails from our HR manager's account. I started keeping a list of all the discrepancies I'd noticed so far. The folder with Rachel's name on it, the golf course polo shirt, the strange email, it all seemed too coincidental. I began to wonder if Rachel was involved in some kind of embezzlement scheme, and if our biggest client, ecotourism, was paying her off. I decided to do some digging. I called the City of Portland's Public Records Department and asked them to send me a copy of the company's most recent tax returns. I also requested a list of all employees who had received bonuses in the past year. When I got home, I started reviewing the documents on my computer, searching for any mention of Rachel's name. As I scrolled through the tax returns, I noticed something strange. The company's biggest expense was listed as consulting fees from an unknown vendor. I remembered a conversation with Alex about a similar deal he had done with a client a few years ago. He had been paid to provide consulting services under a different company name. I decided to investigate further. I asked Alex to come home early from work and meet me in the living room. I showed him the tax return and explained what I had found. He listened attentively, his brow furrowed in concern. "That's not good," he said when I finished. "We need to look into this further." I stared at my phone, the email still open on the screen. The message from Rachel's account said, ecotourism payment update, with a timestamp of 8:45 a.m. But it was the attachment that made my heart skip a beat, a 20-year-old photo of me standing outside Green Tech Inc., taken on the day I started working there. As I stared at the email on my phone, the words ecotourism payment update seemed to mock me. The attachment was a photo of me standing outside Green Tech Inc. on my first day of work. I remembered the bright blue polo shirt and the Starbucks cup like it was yesterday. But it wasn't just any photo, it was taken by Rachel Padel's phone, and the timestamp confirmed it was taken at 8:45 a.m. that morning. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Rachel wasn't just getting kickbacks from ecotourism, she was also blackmailing me. The ongoing performance issues meeting was just a ruse to get me to come in so she could send the email with the photo. implying I was somehow involved in the company's dealings with their biggest client. My eyes scanned the room, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. I had been so blind, so caught up in trying to uncover Rachel's scheme that I never saw my own role in it. The photo of me outside Green Tech Inc. was more than just a coincidence. It was proof that I had unknowingly become part of the very thing I was trying to expose. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized I had been played, used by Rachel to further her own interests. My mind reeled with questions: what else didn't I know? How deep did this go? And how was I going to get out of it alive? I walked into the police station, still clutching my phone with the incriminating email attachment. The officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow as I explained the situation, but he listened attentively. When I finished, he nodded and said, "We'll need a statement from you." I took a deep breath and began to recount everything: the harassment, the dismissal of my complaints, the suspicious meetings with Rachel. As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The officer listened attentively, his expression growing more serious by the minute. When I finished, he nodded and said, "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll take care of it." I left the station feeling a sense of relief wash over me. Rachel Patel was arrested that afternoon for blackmail and harassment. EcoCycle's CEO was also involved in the scandal, and the company's contract with Green Tech Inc. was revoked. I thought about Alex's words when he had first seen the tax return. That's not good? He had been right. But as I looked out at the city streets, I realized that it was good. It was good that justice was being served, and that Rachel Patel would finally face the consequences of her actions. I felt a sense of closure. Like a chapter in my life was finally closing. I took a deep breath and smiled. I still remember the day I moved into my tiny studio apartment in a converted warehouse in the Bushwick neighborhood of Brooklyn. It was a February 27, 2018, and I was ecstatic to be living in the city for the first time after years of college in upstate New York. My husband Alex and I had just bought a used 2015 Honda Civic LX from a private seller on Craigslist, and we'd named it Bertha. We parked her in the lot behind our building, which was run by a friendly woman named Mrs. Patel, who owned the convenience store on the ground floor. As we were unloading boxes, I noticed that the apartment's previous tenant, a young artist, had left behind a collection of dog-eared copies of 1984 on the bookshelf. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I picked up one of the books and saw that it was signed with the inscription, "To the next reader, it's with love," but there was no name. It wasn't until I started digging through the bookshelves that I discovered the strange coincidence: my last name, Wellesley, is actually a reference to the fictional town in Orwell's lesser-known novel, Keep the Aspidistra Flying. I should have kept looking closer. As I was dusting the bookshelves, I noticed a small notebook hidden between two of the 1984 books. The cover was plain black, but the pages were filled with handwritten notes in a script that looked eerily like my own. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I opened it, and saw that the first entry was dated February 25, 2018, just 2 days before I moved in. The writer mentioned something about a pattern and a thread of connection between our lives, but it was too cryptic to make sense. I turned the page to see if there were any other entries, but the notebook ended abruptly with a single sentence: "Bertha's plate is 5 worn true." I looked up at the shelf where we kept the car keys and saw that Alex had parked Bertha's registration in a small envelope labeled 5/1 our anniversary date. Suddenly, the whole apartment felt like it was watching me. As I continued to read the notebook entries, I noticed that the writer mentioned something about a thread of connection between our lives. I decided to look into my family's history, starting with my parents' wedding albums. I spent hours poring over old photographs, but there was nothing out of the ordinary until I found a small inscription on the back of one of the pictures: "For our dear Wellesley, with love, 1984. The handwriting looked eerily familiar. I turned the picture over and saw that it was taken in 1962, at a small bookstore in Greenwich Village. My mother had always been an avid reader, and I remembered her telling me about her favorite bookstores from that era. I started keeping a list of all the strange coincidences: the notebook, the 1984 books, the inscription, the picture. I began to wonder if there was more to my connection to Orwell than just a shared name. I decided to investigate further and started digging through old records and documents related to our family's history. I spent hours in the Brooklyn Public Library, researching everything from property deeds to birth certificates. I found a small mention of a Wellesley who had lived in the same building where I now resided, but when I looked up the address, I realized it was an old publishing house. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read about the publisher's son, who had been involved in a scandal related to 1984, back in the 1950s. The notebook entries mentioned something about a pattern. And now I was starting to see a thread of connection between our lives that went far beyond mere coincidence. I started to notice small changes around the apartment. The books on my shelf were arranged differently, and I could have sworn I saw someone browsing through my collection. I started to feel like I was being watched. And the notebook entries seemed more ominous than ever. I began to wonder if I had stumbled upon something much bigger and more sinister than I initially thought. I stared at the old family photograph. Is my mother's inscription now unmistakable as a code 1984, etched in the same handwriting as the notebook entries. The publisher's son had been involved in a scandal, and I was starting to suspect that my family's history was not what it seemed. Bertha's plate was still 514, and I knew I'd have to look closer. As I stared at the old family photograph, the inscription now unmistakable as a code, I felt a chill run down my spine. The publisher's son had been involved in a scandal related to 1984, back in the 1950s, and I was starting to suspect that my family's history was not what it seemed. I remembered the notebook entries mentioning something about a pattern and a thread of connection between our lives, and now I realized that Bertha's plate was more than just a coincidence. It was a reference to the publishing house where my great-grandfather had worked as a typesetter in the 1940s. I recalled the way the notebook writer mentioned something about handling the truth, and now I understood what they meant. My family had been involved in a long-running conspiracy to hide the publisher's son's true identity as a collaborator with the Soviet Union. The notebook entries were not just random scribbles, but a cryptic message from my great-grandfather, trying to reveal the truth without arousing suspicion. I felt a wave of shame and guilt wash over me as I realized that my ancestors had been complicit in a decades-long cover-up. The apartment, which had once seemed like a warm and welcoming space, now felt like a prison, with secrets and lies hidden behind every door. I knew I had to confront the truth, and the first step was to face the fact that my family's history was built on deceit and betrayal. So I sat in stunned silence, holding the notebook and the photograph, as the truth slowly dawned on me. My family's history was built on deceit and betrayal, but I had uncovered the truth. I decided to take the notebook and the photograph to the local police station, where I spoke with an officer who listened attentively to my story. He told me that they would investigate further and look into the publisher's son's involvement in the scandal. As I left the station, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, knowing that justice was finally being served. The next day, I received a call from the officer, telling me that the investigation had revealed a vast network of conspirators, all involved in covering up the publisher's son's collaboration with the Soviet Union. Several members of my family were arrested and charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice. As I watched them being taken away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, knowing that my family's secrets were finally out in the open. The apartment, which had once felt like a prison, now felt like a refuge, where I could finally breathe freely. I looked out the window and saw Bertha parked in the lot, her plate still 514, but now it seemed like a reminder of the journey I had been on, rather than a source of unease. 2 weeks later. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened since my post went viral. I've been flooded with messages from people who have similar stories of family secrets and deceit, and it's been both comforting and overwhelming at the same time. The police investigation is ongoing, but I did receive a call last week from one of the officers involved in the case. They've discovered that the publisher's son had been in contact with multiple families, using the same tactics to cover up his father's involvement with the Soviet Union. I've also started taking self-defense classes, feeling more confident about my own safety and security. As for Bertha, she's still parked in the lot, but now I see her as a symbol of my newfound independence and strength. I've been married to my husband, Alex, for 5 years, and we've built a comfortable life in the suburbs. We own a white 2015 Honda Civic Hybrid, which I love taking on weekend drives to the nearby orchards. It's a ritual we started when we first moved in together. Every Saturday morning, we'd pack a picnic lunch and drive out to pick apples or peaches, depending on the season. My mother-in-law, Karen, always jokes that our car is our second home because we spend so much time driving around. I've grown fond of her teasing, but lately, it's been on my mind. It started when Alex received an email from his old high school friend, Rachel, who's now a DNA testing platform consultant. He mentioned it in passing, but I remembered seeing her name in the news a few months ago. She'd helped connect some people with long-lost family members through her work. I brushed it off as small talk, but now I'm not so sure. We've always been open about our family history, and Alex has never mentioned anything like this before. I'm starting to wonder if there's more to the story than he's letting on. I should have asked him more questions when he first told me about it. I started going through the mail with a fine-tooth comb, something I never thought I'd do in our quiet life. On Monday morning, I opened the mailbox to find a letter from the state's Vital Records office. The return address was in my name, and it had been sent via certified mail on Friday afternoon. The letter itself was addressed to me, but with my husband's name in parentheses, Mrs. My last name's Alex? I felt a shiver run down my spine as I opened it, expecting some routine document or notification. Instead, it was a notice saying that a DNA test had matched me to an unknown half-sibling, someone I'd never heard of before. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to Alex's high school friend Rachel and her DNA testing platform. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the image of Alex's name in parentheses kept sticking with me. I started going through the mail with a fine-tooth comb, something I never thought I'd do in our quiet life. On Tuesday morning, I opened the mailbox to find a package from my favorite store, TJ Maxx, with a receipt dated the previous Saturday. The item purchased was a set of kitchen knives, which I had not bought. I tried to recall if Alex had made a similar purchase, but it didn't ring a bell. On Wednesday, I received a catalog from Williams, Sonoma, with a personalized cover letter addressed to my last name, Alex. The letter was signed by a customer service representative who seemed to know more about our lives than she should. I started keeping a list of every item that didn't quite add up. On Thursday, I went through my phone's call log and noticed a number I didn't recognize had called me twice on Tuesday evening. The area code matched Alex's hometown, but the phone number itself was unfamiliar. I asked Alex about it during dinner, but he claimed it must have been a wrong number or a telemarketer. He seemed evasive, and for the first time, I felt a nagging sense of unease. On Friday morning, I decided to dig deeper and started searching online for any information about my supposed half-sibling. I found a social media profile with a familiar name, but the profile picture didn't match any records in my database. The name was similar enough to pique my curiosity, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. That evening, while folding laundry, I noticed a receipt from Alex's favorite coffee shop, Starbucks, with a handwritten note on the back. "Thanks for the coffee, Rachel." Rachel, Alex's high school friend who worked on DNA testing platforms. My mind started racing with possibilities. I asked Alex about it during our evening routine, but he brushed it off as a harmless favor from a colleague. He seemed too casual, almost rehearsed. I wasn't convinced. On Saturday, while driving to the orchards with Alex, I noticed he was taking a different route than usual. He claimed it was because of road work, but I knew that section had been closed for months. I turned on the car's GPS, and our route to the orchards showed a detour we'd never taken before. The road led us past my husband's old high school, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as I saw Rachel's name on the school's alumni wall, alongside Alex's. As I stared at the alumni wall, the name, Rachel, stood out like a branding iron on my soul. Suddenly, the image of the DNA test letter, the TJ Maxx receipt, and the Starbucks note all clicked into place. The realization was both overwhelming and crystal clear. My husband's ex-girlfriend, Rachel, was my half-sister. The identical name, the strange dater on our drive to the orchards, it all made sense now. The package from TJ Maxx with the kitchen knives I had not purchased, the personalized catalog from Williams, Sonoma, and even the strange phone calls were all connected to Alex's attempts to keep Rachel a secret from me. I recalled the way he seemed evasive when I asked him about the phone calls, the way he brushed off the Starbucks note as a harmless favor. It was more than just a harmless favor, it was a desperate attempt to keep his past buried. As I processed this new information, a wave of emotions washed over me: sadness, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. The seemingly ordinary days, the routine of our life, had all been built on a foundation of deceit. I felt like I was staring at a stranger, not the man I thought I knew. The road to the orchards, the route we'd taken so many times, now seemed like a carefully constructed lie. I realized that my husband's silence, his avoidance of certain topics, had been a deliberate attempt to keep me in the dark about our family history. The DNA test was not just about finding a long-lost sibling, it was about uncovering the truth about Alex's past, and the secrets he'd kept hidden for so long. I called the police, and they arrived within the hour to take Alex into custody. The DNA test results were matched with Rachel's profile, and it turned out she had been using our home address as her own to receive packages and mails. The TJ Maxx receipt and Williams Sonoma catalog were evidence of her deceit. Alex was charged with obstruction of justice and perjury for lying about his past. We eventually divorced, and I gained custody of our home. Rachel moved in with Alex's parents, who claimed they didn't know anything about her actions. The judge ordered Alex to pay restitution for the emotional distress he had caused me. As I packed up my belongings, I found a note from Alex saying he was sorry and that he had been trying to protect himself from his own secrets. I tore it up and left it behind, feeling a sense of closure and relief. I realized that I deserved better than someone who would deceive me so deeply. The road to the orchards, once filled with laughter and joy, now symbolized the road to my newfound freedom. I'm Emma, a 28-year-old graphic designer living in suburban Chicago with my husband Alex. We've been married for 5 years, and our lives have been quiet and predictable until I stumbled upon that old family photo. It was taken at our 2018 family reunion, and it shows my grandparents, Herb and Margaret, standing in front of a replica of the plane that carried them to their wedding reception. I've never heard them mention this before, and it's definitely not the kind of detail they'd leave out of family lore. I took the photo with my trusty iPhone 8 Plus, which Alex had bought for me last birthday. We love taking road trips in our 20-year-old Honda CR-V, and I was trying to capture a sense of nostalgia. The reunion was held at the Holiday Inn in Naperville, and I remember thinking it was weird that they had such a small, cramped reception area. Alex is an engineer at 3M, and he's always fascinated by the history behind the company's branding and products. He says that the plane replica was probably just a prop for a photo booth or something, but I'm not so sure. There's something about this that's bugging me, something I can't quite put my finger on. I should have kept digging into family history, instead of letting it collect dust in a shoebox. As I was organizing the photo album from our family reunion, I noticed that the plane replica in the background had a small plaque on it with the name, Spirit of 47, engraved on it. I took a closer look and saw that the font was similar to the one used by the Holiday Inn hotel chain. It was a detail that seemed insignificant at first, but something about it made me feel uneasy. I remembered that Alex had been working on a project with Boeing a few years ago, and his company had partnered with the airline to create an exhibit showcasing vintage aircraft. Could this plane replica be connected to that project? I didn't think so, but the more I looked at the photo, the more details started to jump out at me. The way the sunlight was reflecting off the metal, the exact same shade of blue used in the Boeing logo, it all seemed too much of a coincidence. I tried to shake it off as mere nostalgia, but my mind kept wandering back to that mysterious plane replica. I started going through old family photos, trying to find more clues about the mysterious plane replica. I spent hours scouring my grandmother's attic, looking for any documentation or records of their wedding reception. I found an old album with some newspaper clippings, but nothing that mentioned the plane. I decided to dig deeper and started researching the history of the Holiday Inn hotel chain. I looked up the location of the Naperville Holiday Inn where our reunion was held and discovered that it had been renovated in 2015. I wondered if they might have replaced the plane replica with a newer one, or maybe even gotten rid of it altogether. I started keeping a notebook to record all my findings, filling pages with notes, dates, and names. I also began to pay closer attention to Alex's projects at work, wondering if he might be connected to the Boeing exhibit in any way. He seemed evasive when I asked him about it, which only fueled my suspicions. I decided to investigate further and started making phone calls to local historical societies and museums in the area. I spoke with a curator at the DuPage County Historical Museum who told me that they had some records of vintage aircraft on display in the 1950s. I asked if they knew anything about a plane called Spirit of 47, and was met with an awkward silence. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that I might be onto something big. I started to wonder if our family reunion had been more than just a chance gathering. Maybe it had been a deliberate attempt to mislead us about our family's past. I started to feel a sense of unease, like I was walking on thin ice. I continued to research, poring over records and newspaper articles, looking for any mention of the plane or our grandparents' wedding reception. I found an old article about a vintage aircraft show that had been held at the same location as our reunion, featuring a plane called Spirit of 47. The article mentioned that the plane had been restored by a local aviation club. But when I looked up the club's records, there was no mention of any involvement with the Holiday Inn. I was getting close to something, I could feel it. The more I dug, the more questions I had. Why would our family reunion have been held at a location with a replica of this plane? What was Alex hiding at work? And what did our grandparents really know about their wedding reception? As I flipped through the old family photo album, I noticed that my grandparents' wedding reception plane replica had a small inscription on the side. It read, Flight 214, Chicago to Los Angeles, July 14, 1947. The same date and flight number were scribbled in the margin of an old letter from Alex's grandfather, who had supposedly never mentioned this before. As I stared at the photo album, I couldn't shake off the feeling that my grandfather's wedding reception had been more than just a happy occasion. The plane replica in the background still lingered in my mind, and I decided to investigate further. I pulled out my old iPhone 8 Plus, the same one Alex had bought for me last birthday, and scrolled through the photos taken at our family reunion. I zoomed in on the plane replica and noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small inscription on the side that read, Flight 214, Chicago to Los Angeles, July 14, 1947. The same date and flight number were scribbled in the margin of an old letter from Alex's grandfather. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that this was no coincidence. I remembered that Alex had been working on a project with Boeing a few years ago, and his company had partnered with the airline to create an exhibit showcasing vintage aircraft. Could it be that our family reunion had been connected to that project? I thought back to all the conversations we'd had about my grandparents' wedding reception, and how they had always seemed evasive when asked about it. I looked at the photo album again, and this time I noticed a small note attached to one of the pages. It was from Alex, and it read, For Emma, with love. P.S. Don't dig too deep. I sat in our living room, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of home, but my mind was still reeling from the revelations about our family's past. I thought back to that photo I took at our 2018 family reunion, the one that had sparked everything. Alex walked in, saw the look on my face, and knew something was wrong. What is it? He asked, his voice laced with concern. I showed him the photo album, the note he had written to me, and the inscription on the plane replica. He took a deep breath, looked down at his feet, and admitted that he had been part of the Boeing exhibit project, and that our family reunion had indeed been connected to it. He told me that his grandfather's wedding reception plane replica had been used as a prop in the exhibit, and that he had been trying to protect our family's secrets by writing that note. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a sense of closure. We sat there together, holding hands, and slowly began to process everything. The next day, Alex resigned from his job at 3M, and we started a new chapter in our lives, one where the truth was out and we could finally move forward.